welcome, dear listener, to a place where mysteries come alive. Here, we bring you timeless tales of clever detectives, hidden motives, and unexpected twists. Whether it's the daring charm of Tommy and Tuppence, or the keen intellect of Poirot, every story invites you to think, to feel, and to solve the case. Stay curious, and welcome to Guardian of the Night Stories. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of the breakfast room at number 7, Albert Terrace, casting delicate patterns across the white tablecloth. Tommy Beresford folded his newspaper with the precision of a man who had once commanded troops, though those days were now comfortably distant, and regarded his wife over the rim of his teacup. "It says here," he announced, "that the government is concerned about the number of unsolved disappearances along the south coast. 7 in the past 3 months. Tuppence, her red-gold hair catching the light as she reached for the marmalade, barely glanced up. How very obliging of them to be concerned. One does wonder what they're actually doing about it. The usual, I expect. Forming a committee, naturally." She spread marmalade with unnecessary vigour. "Meanwhile, 7 people remain vanished, and presumably someone knows why." Tommy recognised the tone. After 25 years of marriage, he could detect the exact moment when Tuppence's formidable curiosity shifted from idle to active. It was rather like watching a cat spot a particularly interesting bird. "Now, Tuppence, I'm merely observing, Tommy." "Surely one is allowed to observe. Observation, my dear, is your gateway drug to investigation, and investigation inevitably leads to danger. Accusations from local authorities, and my blood pressure reaching concerning levels." Tuppence laughed, that bright, crystalline sound that had first captivated him in a wartime canteen a lifetime ago. "Your blood pressure is perfectly sound. Dr. Murray said so only last month." "That was before you decided to expose the vicar's wife as a jewellery thief. She was a jewellery thief. Tommy, someone had to do something." Before Tommy could respond, their maid Betty entered with the second post. Among the usual bills and circulars was a cream-coloured envelope, expensive paper, addressed to Mrs. Tuppence Beresford in an elegant, slightly old-fashioned hand. Tuppence slit it open with her butter knife. As she read, Tommy watched her expression shift from curiosity to surprise, to something he couldn't quite identify, a shadow crossing her face like a cloud over water. "What is it?" She passed the letter across the table without a word. Tommy read, "Dear Mrs. Beresford, you may not remember me, but we met briefly in 1917 at a charity event in London. I'm writing because I find myself in a situation most delicate, and I believe you may be uniquely positioned to assist me. I am currently residing at the Smuggler's Rest, a small hotel in the village of Salcombe St. Mary, on the Devon coast. Strange things have been occurring here, things I cannot discuss in a letter, but which have me quite concerned for both my safety and my sanity. If you could possibly find time to visit, I would be most grateful. Please come as soon as you are able. I fear I have not much time." Your servant, Mrs. Millicent Havisham Tommy, looked up to find Tuppence already mentally packing. "You don't remember her, do you?" "Not in the slightest. 1917 was rather a long time ago, and there were dozens of charity events. But Tommy, don't you see? The South Coast, the disappearances, and now this woman fears for her safety. It could be completely unrelated." "It could be," Tuppence agreed, her eyes bright with determination. "But I don't believe in coincidence, darling. You taught me that yourself." Tommy sighed, recognizing defeat. "I don't suppose there's any chance you'd wait and make inquiries first." "None whatsoever. Besides, you know you're just as curious as I am. You're simply better at pretending otherwise." She stood, kissing the top of his head as she passed. I'll ring the hotel and tell them to expect us tomorrow. Pack your good tweeds, Tommy. We're going to the seaside." As she left the room, humming softly, Tommy reread the letter. "I fear I have not much time." The words carried a weight that disturbed him more than he cared to admit. He thought of the 7 disappearances, the concern in the government's measured words, and the curious fact that his wife had received a cry for help from a woman she couldn't remember. Something was decidedly wrong in Salcombe St. Mary, and as much as he sometimes wished otherwise, Tommy Beresford had never been one to turn away from trouble, especially when Tuppence was already charging to order it with her usual magnificent recklessness. He folded the letter carefully and went to find his travelling case. Devon in autumn could be beautiful, he reminded himself. Perhaps it would simply be a pleasant holiday with a worried lady who'd gotten herself worked up over nothing. Even as he thought it, Tommy didn't believe a word. The Smuggler's Rest perched on a cliff overlooking the grey-green waters of the English Channel, like a weathered seabird watching for storms. It had once been a proper inn, Tommy surmised, back when smugglers actually plied these waters and revenue men gave chase. Now it served as a small hotel for those seeking either peaceful retirement or escape from something unspoken. The taxi from the station rattled to a halt before a building of ancient stone and newer additions, its windows glowing warmly against the gathering dusk. A sign swung gently in the salt-laden breeze, proclaiming in faded letters the establishment's somewhat notorious name. "Atmospheric," Tuppence observed, gathering her gloves and handbag. "Rather gothic, actually. One expects to see mysterious figures lurking in doorways." "Let's hope we don't," Tommy said, paying the driver. "I'm rather hoping for a nice quiet week by the sea, some decent meals, and a resolution to whatever's troubling Mrs. Havisham that doesn't involve murder, espionage, or international intrigue." "How terribly dull that would be," Tuppence replied cheerfully, preceding him through the door. The interior proved warmer and more welcoming than the exterior suggested. A fire crackled in a massive stone hearth, and comfortable if slightly worn furniture was arranged in conversational groups. The woman behind the small reception desk looked up with a professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Mr. and Mrs. Beresford, we've been expecting you. I'm Mrs. Spence, the proprietress." She was perhaps 60, with iron-grey hair pulled into a severe bun, and the kind of upright posture that suggested either military service or an unyielding spine. "Your rooms are ready. You'll be in numbers 7 and 8 at the end of the corridor. Connecting rooms, as requested." "Thank you," Tuppence said, signing the register. "We're here to visit Mrs. Havisham. Is she about?" Something flickered across Mrs. Spence's face. Surprise, perhaps, or concern. "Mrs. Havisham? I'm afraid she's not here at present." "Not here," Tommy interjected. "But we arranged to meet her." "Yes, well, Mrs. Spence busied herself with keys. She went out yesterday morning and hasn't returned. But I'm sure there's a perfectly reasonable explanation. Mrs. Havisham was always one for long walks." The casual use of past tense did not escape either of the Beresfords. "You say was," Tuppence noted quietly. "Do you believe something has happened to her?" Mrs. Spence's professional mask slipped for just a moment, revealing genuine worry beneath. "I'm sure I don't know, madam. It's just that, well, she's the 3rd guest we've had disappear in the past 6 weeks. The police were here only yesterday asking questions." "The 3rd? Tommy exchanged a glance with Tuppence. "What did the police say?" "That they're investigating." Mrs. Spence's tone suggested exactly what she thought of that assurance. "But between you and me, they seem to think our guests are simply leaving without paying their bills. As if I wouldn't notice that their belongings are all still in their rooms. A door opened somewhere deeper in the building, and a man emerged into the reception area. He was perhaps 50, with the kind of distinguished grey at his temples that suggested a military or diplomatic background. His eyes, sharp and assessing, took in the Beresfords with unconcealed interest. "New guests, Mrs. Spence. How delightful! We've been rather short of company lately." His smile was charming, but somehow failed to soften the calculation in his gaze. "Captain Roger Marchmont, lately of His Majesty's Foreign Office. And you are?" "Thomas and Prudence Beresford," Tommy replied, offering his hand. "Just here for a quiet holiday." "Ah, yes, quiet." Marchmont's smile widened fractionally. Selcombe St. Mary is certainly that. Almost too quiet, one might say, for those accustomed to excitement. A woman appeared from the same corridor, younger than Marchmont by at least 2 decades, with elaborate blonde curls and the kind of careful makeup that suggested either theatrical experience or deep insecurity. "Roger, darling, you promised we'd walk before dinner, and oh," she stopped upon seeing the Beresfords, her painted lips forming a perfect O of surprise. "How lovely! New people! I'm Veronica Vale. Perhaps you've seen my films." "I'm afraid we don't get to the cinema as often as we should," Tuppence said diplomatically. "Oh." Veronica's disappointment was palpable. "Well, I've been in several very important pictures. Haven't I, Roger?" "Indeed you have, my dear." Marchmont's tone carried the faintest edge of impatience. "Now, about that walk. If you'll excuse me," Mrs. Spence interrupted, "I should show the Beresfords to their rooms. Dinner is at 7:30, should you wish to join the other guests in the dining room." As they followed the proprietress up the creaking stairs, Tuppence whispered, "Rather an interesting collection of characters." Tommy agreed. "Marchmont's no more lately of the Foreign Office than I'm lately of the Ballet Russes. I'd stake my pension he's still actively employed by someone." "And Miss Vale, or is it Mrs. Marchmont, seems rather nervous for a woman on holiday with a distinguished gentleman." Their rooms proved comfortable if Spartan, with windows overlooking the darkening sea. After Mrs. Spence departed with promises of hot water and fresh towels, Tommy and Tuppence reconvened in the larger of the 2 rooms. "So," Tommy said, settling into an armchair, "Mrs. Havisham has vanished just like the others, which means either she was warning us about a danger that subsequently caught up with her, or she was the danger itself," Tuppence finished, "and has absconded after sending us a false trail to follow." "But why would she do that?" "Why indeed?" Tommy steepled his fingers, a gesture Tuppence recognised from countless previous investigations. "I think we should do what Mrs. Havisham apparently did. Go for a walk. See what there is to see in Selcombe St. Mary, before someone else disappears." "Precisely." They descended to find the reception area empty. Voices drifted from what was presumably the dining room. Marchmont's measured tones, Veronica's higher-pitched responses, and a third voice, male and younger, that they hadn't yet heard. Rather than investigating immediately, they slipped out into the twilight. The village proper lay down a winding path from the hotel, a collection of greystone buildings huddled against the elements. A church, a post office, a small shop and a pub called the Admiral's Arms comprised the bulk of civilization. "Not much here," Tommy observed. "No," Tuppence agreed, "which makes one wonder why anyone would come here to disappear. There must be easier places to vanish, with more crowds and confusion." They walked toward the cliff edge, where a worn path suggested regular traffic. The wind had picked up, carrying the salt spray and the cry of gulls heading home to roost. Below, Waves crashed against dark rocks with timeless violence. "Tommy," Tuppence said suddenly, gripping his arm. "Look there." He followed her gaze to a point perhaps 50 yards distant, where the cliff edge had crumbled away, leaving a raw scar in the earth, and caught on a gorse bush some feet below the edge, fluttering like a trapped bird, was a silk scarf, emerald green with a distinctive paisley pattern. "That," Tuppence said quietly, "is not a good sign." "No," Tommy agreed, feeling that familiar tightening in his chest that meant danger was closer than comfortable. "No, it's not. We should fetch the police." But even as he said it, he knew what Tuppence would say next. "First," she said, her voice steady and determined, "we should see if there's anything else down there. Evidence, Tommy, before the tide comes in and washes it away." He sighed. "I was afraid you'd say that." As they carefully approached the cliff edge, the last light fading from the sky, Tommy couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere in the gathering darkness, someone was watching them with great interest, and that person was very much hoping they'd look over that edge and perhaps tumble right over it. The local constabulary, in the person of Constable William Derrick, proved to be a ruddy-faced man of perhaps 40, with the build of a farmer, and the manner of someone who preferred his mysteries to remain theoretical. He stood at the cliff edge with Tommy and Tuppence, regarding the scarf with evident displeasure. "Well," he said at length, "that's unfortunate." "Rather an understatement," Tuppence observed. "That scarf almost certainly belongs to one of the missing persons. The pattern is quite distinctive." "Could have blown in from anywhere," Derrick countered, but without conviction. "We get fierce winds along this coast. Things turn up in the oddest places." "Things, perhaps," Tommy said, "but a silk scarf in near-perfect condition, caught precisely at the point where the cliff has recently given way. That seems less like weather and more like evidence." The constable's eyes narrowed slightly. "You folks aren't from around here. May I ask what brings you to Salcombe St. Mary? Bit late in the season for holiday makers." Tuppence produced Mrs. Havisham's letter, which Derrick read with increasing concern. "And you say you've never met this lady? Bit odd, her writing to a stranger." "Exceedingly odd," Tuppence agreed, "which is precisely why we came. And now it appears she may have met with foul play before we could discover what she wanted to tell us. Foul play." Derrick said the words as if they tasted unpleasant. "That's quite an assumption, ma'am. Could be Mrs. Havisham simply had an accident. Tragic, but these cliffs are treacherous, especially for townspeople who don't know them." "And the other two who've disappeared from the Smuggler's Rest?" Tommy pressed. "Were they also careless townspeople on treacherous cliffs?" The constable's expression suggested this was a sore point. "The other disappearances are being investigated. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to fetch some rope and have a proper look below. In daylight, I'd advise you both to return to the hotel and leave this matter to the proper authorities." As they walked back through the deepening darkness, Tuppence fumed. "The proper authorities. That man has about as much interest in investigating as I have in competitive sheep shearing." "He's frightened," Tommy said thoughtfully. "Did you notice? When we mentioned the other disappearances, he went positively pale. He knows something, Tuppence, or suspects something he doesn't want to confirm." The Smuggler's Rest loomed before them, its windows now blazing with light against the night. They entered to find the small dining room occupied by the other guests. In addition to Marchmont and Veronica, there was now a younger man, perhaps 30, with dark hair and the lean, hungry look of an artist or poet. Mrs. Spence performed introductions. Mr. and Mrs. Beresford, this is Mr. Anthony Gilmore. He's been with us for about a month now, working on a book." "A novel," Gilmore clarified, his voice carrying a faint accent that Tommy couldn't quite place. "Continental, certainly. About the war, though it progresses slowly in such quiet surroundings." His smile was self-deprecating. "Perhaps too slowly. I shouldn't think the surroundings are the problem," Veronica said with a tinkling laugh. "Roger says all writers are really just avoiding actually writing. Isn't that so, darling?" Marchmont, who had been studying Tommy and Tuppence with that same assessing gaze from earlier, said mildly, "I said no such thing, Veronica. But I do find Mr. Gilmore's choice of location curious. One would think London or Paris would offer more inspiration for a war novel than a remote Devon village. I prefer solitude," Gilmore said, a slight edge entering his voice. "Cities are full of distractions. Here one can think." "And disappear, apparently," Tommy said casually, taking his seat. "We've just come from speaking with Constable Derrick about the missing guests." The effect of his words was immediate and varied. Marchmont's eyebrows rose slightly. Veronica's fork clattered to her plate. Gilmore went very still. Even Mrs. Spence, serving soup from a tureen, hesitated fractionally. "A distressing business," Marchmont said after a moment. "Though I'm sure there's a rational explanation. People do sometimes choose to simply leave, you know. Start fresh elsewhere. Without their luggage?" Tuppence asked innocently. How very spontaneous," Mrs. Havisham wrote to us," Tommy continued, watching the reactions carefully. "Just before she disappeared, said she was concerned about strange occurrences here. Did any of you know her well?" "Hardly at all," Veronica said quickly, perhaps too quickly. "She kept to herself mostly. Rather a sour-faced woman, I thought. No offence meant, Mrs. Spence." "None taken, I'm sure," the proprietress said neutrally. Gilmore cleared his throat. "I spoke with her once or twice. She seemed troubled, as if something weighed on her mind. I assumed it was personal matters. One does not pry." "Very continental of you," Marchmont observed. "We English, of course, pry constantly while pretending we're doing nothing of the sort." Mrs. Havisham struck me as a woman with a past. Most of us here have pasts, I suspect. He said this last while, looking directly at Tommy, who met his gaze steadily. "I find the present quite interesting enough, Captain, especially when it involves unexplained disappearances." The dinner conversation moved to safer topics. The weather, the declining quality of modern literature, the shocking state of the roads. But the tension remained. Tuppence observed that no one seemed to have much appetite, herself included. The food, while competently prepared, might as well have been sawdust. After dinner, as the others drifted toward the sitting room, Mrs. Spence caught Tommy's arm. "A word, if I may." She led them to her small private office behind the reception desk. Once the door was closed, her composure cracked slightly. "I shouldn't be telling you this, but since Mrs. Havisham wrote to you, there's something you should know, yes?" Tuppence prompted gently. "The day before she disappeared, Mrs. Havisham came to me in a state, said she'd realized something important, something to do with the other missing guests. She'd found a connection, she said, something that linked them all." "Did she say what it was?" Tommy asked urgently. "No, she said she needed to confirm one more thing first. She went out that morning with a notebook and never came back." Mrs. Spence's hands twisted together. "I should have insisted she tell me then, or called the police. But she was so certain, so determined. She said she'd have proof by evening." "And you've looked through her room?" Tuppence asked. "Of course, but there's nothing useful, just clothing and personal effects. No notebook, no papers, nothing to suggest what she'd discovered." A floorboard creaked in the corridor outside. Mrs. Spence went pale. "That's all I can tell you. Please, just Be careful. I don't know what's happening in my hotel, but I feel as if we're all in danger, and I haven't the faintest idea why." Back in their room, Tommy paced while Tuppence sat at the small writing desk, making notes. 3 disappearances, she said, all from this hotel. Mrs. Havisham discovers a connection, goes out to confirm it, and vanishes. The police are either incompetent or complicit, and we have a collection of guests who are all clearly hiding something. Marchmont's intelligence services. I'd stake my life on it, Tommy said. But whose? Ours or someone else's? Gilmore's accent bothers me. It's too carefully neutral. Veronica's terrified beneath all that makeup and forced gaiety, and Mrs. Spence knows more than she's saying. The question is, what's the connection? What links the missing people? A soft knock at the door interrupted them. Tommy opened it cautiously to find Gilmore standing in the dim corridor, his expression troubled. "Forgive the intrusion," he said quietly. "But I think you should know. I saw someone tonight. After dinner, I went out for a cigarette. There was a figure on the cliff path, watching the hotel. When I called out, they ran. Man or woman?" Tommy asked sharply. "I couldn't tell. They were too far away, and it was dark. But they moved quickly, purposefully." He hesitated. "There's something wrong here, Mr. Beresford. I don't know what game you and your wife are playing, but I would suggest you leave Salcombe St. Mary while you still can." Before Tommy could respond, Gilmore had slipped away, disappearing into his room and closing the door with a quiet click. "Well," Tuppence said from behind him, "that was either a warning or a threat, possibly both. Quite." Tommy closed and locked their door, checking the window as well. "I think we should take turns keeping watch tonight. I don't fancy being the 4th disappearance from the Smuggler's Rest." As Tommy settled into the chair by the window, watching the moonlight glitter on the distant sea, Tuppence lay in bed, not sleeping but thinking. 3 people had vanished. A connection existed but remained hidden. Someone was watching the hotel, and she and Tommy were now marked as investigators, which meant they were also marked as threats. Whatever was happening in Salcombe St. Mary, it was accelerating, and they had very little time to discover the truth before they became the next victims of whatever darkness haunted the clifftop. Hotel Hot Morning brought grey skies and a biting wind that rattled the windows like impatient fingers. Tommy had dozed fitfully in the chair, waking to find Tuppence already dressed and regarding him with amused affection. "You snore, darling." "Rather heroically. I do not snore. I breathe dramatically." He stood, stretching muscles that protested their night in the chair. "Anything happen while I was breathing dramatically?" "Nothing, which is either reassuring or ominous. I can't decide which." She moved to the window. The constable's down at the cliff edge with 2 other men. "They've got ropes." Tommy joined her, watching the distant figures moving carefully along the treacherous edge. "Looking for Mrs. Havisham's body, I expect, or evidence that she went over." "Do you think she did? Truly?" "I think someone wants us to believe she did." He turned away from the window. "Mrs. Spence said Mrs. Havisham found a connection between the missing guests. I say we start there. What do we know about the first 2 who disappeared?" A discreet breakfast-time interrogation of Mrs. Spence yielded some information. The first to vanish 6 weeks prior had been a Mr. Edmund Cartwright, a retired colonial administrator from Malaya. The second, 3 weeks later, was Miss Jennifer Pierce, a young woman who'd claimed to be recuperating from a long illness. "Both kept to themselves," Mrs. Spence said, refilling their tea. "Mr. Cartwright was working on his memoirs, I believe. Miss Pierce mostly walked on the beach. Neither was particularly sociable. And you've no idea what they might have had in common?" Tuppence asked. "None whatsoever. They were here at different times, barely overlapped by a few days. I don't believe they ever spoke." She paused, glancing toward the kitchen door. Though now that you mention it, there was one odd thing. After Mr. Cartwright disappeared, I was cleaning his room and found he'd torn a page from a book. The Life of Lord Hastings it was. Why anyone would deface a book is beyond me. You still have the book? Tommy asked quickly. In the library. We keep a small collection for guests. Help yourself. The library was a set of shelves in an alcove off the main sitting room. Tommy located the volume easily. A dry biography of a Victorian statesman. The torn page had been near the middle, leaving a ragged edge. Why tear out a page? Tuppence mused. Unless it contained something important, something worth preserving or hiding. Or, Tommy said slowly, unless it was being used as a marker or a message. Page numbers, perhaps? A code? Their investigation was interrupted by Veronica, who swept into the room with the air of someone who required an audience. There you are. How absolutely dreary it is today. Roger's gone off somewhere mysterious. He's always doing that. And Mr. Gilmore's locked himself in his room, presumably wrestling with his art. I'm quite desperately bored. Would you care to join us for a walk? Tuppence offered, seeing an opportunity. We thought we'd explore the village properly. Oh, Veronica's face brightened, then fell. But the wind is simply ghastly. It will destroy my hair. Perhaps we could have tea instead, Tuppence suggested smoothly. Here, in the sitting room. I'm quite curious about the hotel's history. This proved more to Veronica's taste. Once settled with tea and biscuits, she proved unexpectedly forthcoming. Whether from loneliness, boredom, or a genuine desire to talk, Tuppence couldn't determine. I came here with Roger 6 weeks ago, she confided, stirring sugar into her tea with unnecessary vigour. We'd been in London, and he said we needed somewhere quiet. Away from prying eyes, he said. Roger has important work, you understand. Very hush-hush, and you've been here ever since? Tommy asked. Yes, though it's been dreadfully dull, except for the disappearances, and even those are more creepy than exciting. She leaned forward conspiratorially. Between us, I think Roger's here for a reason, not just for quiet. He watches everyone very carefully, takes notes even, in a little black book he thinks I don't know about. How intriguing, Tuppence murmured. Has he been watching anyone in particular? Veronica's pretty face clouded. Mr. Cartwright before he vanished, and Mrs. Havisham. He used to follow her sometimes when she went walking. I caught him at it once, and he claimed he was just taking the air. But I know what I saw. Did you mention this to the police? Tommy asked. Goodness, no. Roger would be furious. Besides, the constable's useless. Everyone knows that, she bit her lip. I probably shouldn't be telling you any of this. Roger says I talk too much, but you both seem so kind and normal, and I'm rather frightened if I'm honest. Frightened of what? Tuppence asked gently. I don't know. That's what makes it worse. Roger's changed since we came here. He's always tense, always watching, and at night, sometimes I hear him on the telephone in Mrs. Spence's office, speaking in low voices. Once I heard him say, the operation is compromised. What operation? And why are we really here? Before Tuppence could respond, the front door opened, admitting Marchmont himself, wind-blown and carrying the scent of sea air. His eyes took in the domestic tea scene with sharp assessment. Veronica, darling. Making friends, I see. Just chatting, Veronica said, her earlier animation draining away. The Beresfords were telling me about London. I do miss it so. Perhaps we should return soon, Marchmont said smoothly, though my business here isn't quite concluded. He turned to Tommy. I understand you were asking questions this morning about the missing guests. Dangerous hobby, amateur detection. People who ask too many questions sometimes find answers they don't care for. "Is that a threat, Captain?" Tommy asked mildly. "A friendly warning. Between gentlemen." Marchmont's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Salcombe St. Mary has secrets, Mr. Beresford. Old secrets, deep secrets. Sometimes it's wiser to leave them buried." "And sometimes," Tuppence interjected sweetly, "secrets have a way of coming to light, whether we will it or not. Rather like bodies, I imagine." Marchmont's mask slipped for just an instant, revealing something harder and more dangerous beneath. Then it was back, the charming Foreign Office gentleman. "Indeed. Well, don't let me interrupt your tea. Come along, Veronica." After they'd gone, Tommy exhaled slowly. "He's admitted he's still working, and he's as good as confirmed he knows something about the disappearances." "And poor Veronica's caught in the middle," Tuppence added. "She knows something's wrong but doesn't know what. Rather like us, except we're choosing to be here." They found Gilmore in the hotel's small bar, nursing what appeared to be whiskey despite the early hour. His greeting was perfunctory, his manner distracted. "Still here, I see," he said. "I thought you might have taken my advice." "We're not very good at taking advice," Tuppence said, settling onto a bar stool. "Tell me, Mr. Gilmore, what brings a continental writer to a remote English village? The war's been over for years. Surely you could write about it anywhere." Gilmore's hand tightened on his glass. "I came here for the same reason as everyone else, Mrs. Beresford. To escape something." "What are you escaping from? Memories? Ghosts? Regrets?" He drained his glass. "Take your pick. We all have our burdens." "Did you know any of the missing people?" Tommy asked. "Cartwright? Miss Pierce? Mrs. Havisham?" "I spoke with Cartwright a few times. He'd been in Malaya during the war, in intelligence. He had stories." Gilmore's expression was unreadable. "Interesting stories about betrayals and double agents, about people who sold secrets and those who bought them. And Miss Pierce, I never spoke to her. She seemed fragile, nervous, as if she expected something terrible to happen." He laughed without humour. "Turns out she was right." "You don't think they simply left?" Tuppence pressed. "Do you?" The question hung in the air. Before anyone could answer, Mrs. Spence appeared in the doorway, her face pale. "Mr. Beresford, Mrs. Beresford, the constable is here. He wants to speak with you both. They've found something on the cliff. The something was a handbag. Expensive leather gone sodden with seawater, caught in the rocks below the cliff edge. Constable Derrick laid it on a newspaper on Mrs. Spence's desk, water pooling around it. Found it just before high tide," he said grimly. "Another hour and it would have been swept away. Belongs to Mrs. Havisham, according to her identity papers inside." Tommy examined the bag carefully without touching it. "Anything else in there? Papers? That notebook Mrs. Spence mentioned?" "Just the usual feminine items. No notebook." Derrick's face was troubled. "There's something else. The clasp. See how it's broken? Like someone tore it from her grasp." "Or," Tuppence said quietly, "like someone wanted it to look that way. To suggest a struggle at the cliff edge. You're saying she was pushed?" Derrick looked ill. "I'm saying nothing is as it appears in Salcombe St. Mary," Tuppence replied. 3 people have vanished, Constable. 3 people who apparently had some connection Mrs. Havisham discovered. Now she's gone too, and all we have is a convenient scarf and handbag near a cliff edge. Rather too convenient, wouldn't you say? Mrs. Beresford, no body, Tommy interrupted. You've been searching since dawn and found no body, which means either she wasn't killed at the cliff or she wasn't killed at all. Have you considered that the disappearances might not be murders, but something else entirely? Such as? Derek challenged. We don't know yet, Tommy admitted, but we will. Tell me, Constable, what do you know about Captain Marchmont? Derek's expression shuttered. I couldn't say, sir. Couldn't or won't? Take your pick. The constable gathered up the handbag. I'll be filing a report with my superiors. Beyond that, I'd advise you both to stay out of police business. We don't take kindly to interference. After he'd gone, Tuppence turned to Tommy. He knows something, and he's been told to keep quiet, which means this goes higher than local police. Which means Marchmont really is intelligence services, Tommy agreed. And either he's investigating the disappearances officially, or he's covering them up. We need to know which. That evening, as darkness fell early and complete, Tommy and Tuppence held a council of war in their room. Facts, Tommy said, pacing. 3 disappearances from this hotel. All 3 kept to themselves, but were apparently connected somehow. Marchmont's intelligence services and watching everyone. Gilmore's hiding something and knows more than he's saying. Veronica's frightened. Mrs. Spence is protecting her business and possibly hiding information. The local constable's been muzzled, and someone was watching the hotel last night. And Mrs. Havisham, Tuppence added, wrote to us, strangers, for help. Why? What made her think we could be trusted? How did she even know about us? That, Tommy said slowly, is an excellent question. One I think we need to answer urgently. A knock at the door made them both tense. Tommy answered it to find Mrs. Spence wringing her hands. I'm sorry to disturb you, but there's a telephone call. For Mrs. Beresford. A gentleman who won't give his name. Tuppence followed her downstairs to the small office. She picked up the receiver cautiously. Yes, Mrs. Beresford. The voice was cultured male and utterly unfamiliar. I knew Mrs. Havisham. She spoke of you before she disappeared. Said you would understand certain things. Things she'd discovered. Who is this? Tuppence demanded. A friend or a warning? Perhaps both. Listen carefully. Salcombe St. Mary is not what it seems. Neither are its visitors. Mrs. Havisham stumbled onto something from the war, an operation that never quite ended. People with dangerous secrets. She thought you would help expose the truth. What truth? And why not go to the authorities? A soft laugh. Because some of them are in on it, Mrs. Beresford. Some of the authorities are the threat. Trust no one in that hotel. Not Marchmont, not Gilmore, not even the ones who seem harmless. They're all there for a reason. Wait, but the line was already dead. Tuppence stood frozen, the receiver humming in her hand. An operation from the war that never ended. Dangerous secrets. Trust no one. And someone had been watching them, measuring them, deciding whether they were allies or threats. The game, whatever it was, had just become infinitely more dangerous. Tommy listened to Tuppence's account of the mysterious call with growing concern. An operation from the war. That could mean anything from intelligence work to black market operations to hidden collaborators. The war ended 7 years ago, but its shadows are long. Mrs. Havisham must have discovered something specific. Tuppence said, pacing their room as dawn broke over the grey sea. Something worth silencing her over. She said she'd found a connection between the missing people. What if they were all involved in this wartime operation? What if someone's eliminating witnesses or co-conspirators? Or, Tommy suggested, what if they're not missing at all? What if they've gone into hiding because they're afraid of being found? A soft knock interrupted them. Tommy opened the door to find a young boy, perhaps 12, with the weathered face of someone raised on the coast. "Message for Mrs. Beresford," he said, thrusting an envelope forward and scampering off before they could question him. The envelope was cheap paper, the kind sold in any village shop. Inside was a single sheet with words cut from a newspaper and pasted together. Mrs. Havisham's room. 3rd floorboard left of window. Before noon today. Well, Tuppence said, that's not ominous at all. It could be a trap, Tommy warned. Undoubtedly, but it's also our only lead. She checked her watch. 9:30. Mrs. Spence will be serving breakfast. The perfect time to search an empty room. They descended to find the dining room, occupied only by Gilmore, who looked as though he'd spent another night with more whiskey than sleep. He nodded vaguely at them and returned to his coffee and newspaper. "Mrs. Spence," Tuppence said sweetly, "I'm feeling rather poorly this morning. I think I'll skip breakfast and rest. Perhaps you could send up some tea later." "Of course, dear. Nothing serious, I hope? Just a headache. The sea air, probably. I'm not quite used to it yet." Once Mrs. Spence returned to the kitchen, Tuppence slipped upstairs, while Tommy remained in the dining room, ostensibly reading his own paper while actually keeping watch. Mrs. Havisham's room was at the end of the 2nd floor corridor, door unlocked. Tuppence entered quickly, closing the door behind her. The room was neat, almost obsessively so. Clothing hung precisely in the wardrobe, toilet articles arranged by size on the dresser, bed made with military corners. She found the loose floorboard easily. Beneath it, wrapped in oilcloth, was a small notebook. Tuppence's hands trembled slightly as she opened it. The entries were dated, the handwriting precise and educated. October 3rd. Arrived at the Smuggler's Rest. The location is as remote as promised. If I'm right, this is where they've been operating from. So far from London, from official oversight. Brilliant, really, in its audacity. October 5th. Confirmed that Marchmont is here. Using the name Roger Marchmont, but I recognize him from the war. He was in intelligence then, running operations in occupied France. What is he doing in this god-forsaken village? October 7th. The writer Gilmore isn't what he seems. His accent slips when he's tired. German, I think, underneath the continental Polish. Another player in whatever game is being run from here. There's October 9th, followed Marchmont tonight. He met someone in the village, someone who arrived by boat. Documents changed hands. This is still active. After all these years, it's still active. October 12th. I've made a terrible mistake. I was too obvious in my watching. This morning, Marchmont stared straight at me at breakfast. He knows I need help, but don't know who to trust. The Beresfords, Tommy and Tuppence. I remember them from the war, though we barely spoke. They solved that affair at the embassy. The one everyone thought was suicide, but wasn't. If anyone can expose this, they can. The final entry was dated 3 days ago, October 15th. I know the connection now. Cartwright, Pierce, and myself, we all worked intelligence during the war. Different departments, different operations, but we all knew about the network. The spy ring that was never fully dismantled. Someone is tying up loose ends. Someone powerful enough to make people vanish without trace. I'm writing to the Beresfords tonight. If I disappear before they arrive, they'll know where to look. The truth is in the pattern. 3 down, and the network runs deeper than anyone suspected. They're not done yet. More will disappear unless... The entry ended abruptly, mid-sentence. Tuppence stood frozen, the notebook in her hands. A spy ring from the war still operating. Intelligence officers being eliminated. And Marchmont at the centre of it. A floorboard creaked behind her. She spun to find Marchmont himself in the doorway, his expression cold and dangerous. "Mrs. Beresford, how industrious of you! Though I suppose I should have expected no less from the woman who exposed the Belmont spy ring in 19. He stepped inside, closing the door softly. "You've been reading Mrs. Havisham's theories, I see. Quite the imagination she had." "These aren't theories," Tuppence said, keeping her voice steady. "They're facts. You were in intelligence during the war. You're still active, and you're eliminating anyone who knew about the network. Am I?" Marchmont moved further into the room, casual but alert. "Or am I investigating the same disappearances you are? Consider this, Mrs. Beresford. If I were disposing of inconvenient witnesses, why would I do it in such a public manner? Why create a mystery that draws attention, rather than eliminating problems quietly? To sow confusion, to make it look like random disappearances rather than targeted eliminations. Or, Marchmont said, because I'm trying to protect the remaining targets. Because someone else is hunting them, and I'm trying to prevent further casualties." Tuppence studied him, trying to read truth from lies. If that's the case, why not identify yourself to the authorities? Why this charade? Because I don't know who's compromised. The network went deep, Mrs. Beresford, into police, government, military. Mrs. Havisham was right about one thing. Someone powerful is orchestrating this. Someone who can make bodies disappear and investigations stall. I've been working undercover, trying to identify who's behind it. And have you? I have suspicions. No proof. He glanced at the notebook in her hands. "That might help, though, may I?" Tuppence hesitated, then passed it over. Marchmont read quickly, his expression growing darker. "The meeting in the village," he muttered. "She saw that. Damn, she was better at surveillance than I gave her credit for." He looked up. "That wasn't a handler, Mrs. Beresford. That was my superior. I was reporting my progress. Or covering your tracks. Yes, that's the problem with intelligence work. Everything looks suspicious, even the innocent bits." He closed the notebook. "But consider this. If I wanted to stop you investigating, why am I talking to you instead of simply adding you to the list of disappeared guests?" It was a fair point, though Tuppence didn't trust him. "So who do you think is behind this?" "I think," Marchmont said slowly, "that the network was never fully dismantled because someone high up protected it. Someone who saw value in maintaining a spy ring even after the war ended. And now that ring is being activated for something new. The old members are either being eliminated because they know too much, or they're being brought back in." Which was Mrs. Havisham. A witness. She knew names, faces, operations, but she was never active, just very, very observant. He handed back the notebook. "Keep that safe. It's evidence. But Mrs. Beresford, you need to understand. You and your husband have walked into something very dangerous. The kind of dangerous that ends with people vanishing off cliff edges. Was that a threat? A warning? There's a difference if you'll accept it." He moved to the door, then paused. "One more thing. Be careful of Gilmore. He's not what he seems. None of us are." After he'd gone, Tuppence sat heavily on the bed, her mind racing. Marchmont could be telling the truth, or spinning an elaborate lie. The notebook was damning, but also incomplete. And somewhere, someone was watching, waiting, planning the next move. She needed to find Tommy. Downstairs, she found him in the sitting room with Mrs. Spence, who looked badly shaken. "Oh, Mrs. Beresford. Thank goodness. It's Mr. Gilmore. He's gone." "Gone?" Tuppence felt her stomach drop. "Since when?" "This morning. I went to collect his breakfast tray, and the room was empty. His things are still there, but he's vanished. Just like the others." Tommy caught Tuppence's eye, his expression grim. 4 disappearances now, and the pattern was accelerating. "Mrs. Spence," Tuppence said gently, "we need to see Mr. Gilmore's room, right now." The room told its story in small details. Clothes still in the wardrobe, a manuscript on the desk, genuine novel or elaborate cover, or, and curiously, a photograph tucked into the mirror frame. It showed a group of young men in uniform, wartime vintage. Tuppence studied the faces and felt her blood run cold. "Tommy," she whispered, pointing. "Third from the left." It was Gilmore, younger, in German military uniform. "Good God," Tommy breathed. "He was German intelligence. Or a double agent," Tuppence said. "Either way, he lied about everything. But why come here? Why stay at this particular hotel?" The answer came from an unexpected source. Veronica appeared in the doorway, mascara smeared from crying. "I heard Mr. Gilmore was gone," she said tremulously. "That's 4 now. 4! When does it stop?" She caught sight of the photograph and gasped. "Where did you get that?" "It was here in his room," Tommy said. "Do you recognize any of these men?" Veronica took the photograph with shaking hands. "This one," she said, pointing to a young man on the far right. "That's Roger. 20 years younger, but it's him. He was in military intelligence during the war." She looked up, tears streaming. "He lied to me. He said he was Foreign Office, that he'd had a desk job. But this is field uniform, operational." "Veronica?" Tuppence said carefully. "Did Roger ever talk about the war? About his work?" "No. He said it was classified, better forgotten. But sometimes at night he has nightmares. Calls out names. Hans, Victor, the shepherd." She pressed the photograph back into Tuppence's hands. "I don't know what's happening here, but I want to leave. Today. Now. Before I'm the next one to disappear." "I think that's wise," Tommy said. "Pack your things. We'll make sure you get safely to the station." After Veronica fled, Tuppence showed Tommy Mrs. Havisham's notebook. His face grew increasingly grave as he read. "The shepherd," he said finally. "That's a code name. A handler. Someone who ran agents during the war." He studied the photograph again. If Marchmont and Gilmore were both in this picture, both in intelligence, then they knew each other. Which means everything. The chance meeting here, the supposed anonymity. It's all been theatre. But to what end? Tuppence demanded. If they're working together, why the disappearances? If they're enemies, why not simply eliminate each other? "Because," said a new voice from the doorway, "it's not that simple. It never is." They turned to find Constable Derrick, but transformed, standing straighter. His country manner dropped, his eyes sharp and intelligent. "Detective Inspector Harrison, Special Branch," he said, producing credentials. "I've been undercover here for 6 weeks, investigating exactly what you've stumbled into, Mr. and Mrs. Beresford, and we're running out of time." The pieces were beginning to come together, but the picture they formed was far darker than anything Tommy and Tuppence had imagined. And somewhere in Salcombe St. Mary, the real shepherd was watching, waiting, and preparing the next move in a game that had been playing out since the war ended. A game where the stakes were life, death, and secrets that could reshape the very fabric of national security. Harrison, no longer playing the part of simple Constable Derek, closed the door of Gilmore's room and spoke in low, urgent tones. "I need to know exactly what you've learned. Every detail, no matter how insignificant it seems." Tommy and Tuppence exchanged glances. Tuppence made a decision. "First, you tell us what Special Branch is doing in a Devon village. Then we'll decide what to share." A brief smile crossed Harrison's face. "Fair enough. 6 months ago, we received intelligence that a wartime spy network, codenamed the Shepherd's Fold, was being reactivated. The original operation ran from 1916 to 1918, primarily in occupied France and Belgium. After the armistice, most of the agents were repatriated or disappeared. We thought the network was dead." "But it wasn't," Tommy said. "No, we began noticing patterns. Former agents dying under suspicious circumstances. Heart attacks, accidents, suicides. Always plausible, never quite provable. Then the disappearances started here. 3 former intelligence officers, all with connections to the Shepherd's Fold, all vanishing from the same location within weeks of each other." "Why this place?" Tuppence asked. "Why the Smuggler's Rest?" Harrison moved to the window, looking out at the grey morning. During the war, this was a way station. Agents coming back from France would land on these beaches at night, be harboured here briefly, then moved on to London for debriefing. Mrs. Spence's late husband ran it. He was in intelligence himself. After the war, it became a legitimate hotel, but the location was always remembered by those who'd used it. "So the missing people came here deliberately," Tommy said. "Seeking what? Safety? Or something else? We're not sure. That's what I was trying to discover when you arrived and complicated everything." Harrison's tone held a hint of reproach. "Mrs. Havisham's letter to you triggered alarms in London. We knew she'd been making inquiries about the Shepherd's Fold. When she wrote to you, we assumed she'd discovered something critical." Tuppence produced the notebook. "She did." Harrison read it, his expression darkening. "This confirms our worst fears. The network wasn't dismantled. It was preserved. Someone in authority protected it, kept it dormant. Now it's active again. But why eliminate the old members?" Tommy asked. "If they're bringing the network back, wouldn't they need experienced operatives?" "Unless," Tuppence said slowly, "the new operation is different. Unless the people who knew about the original network would recognize that something's changed, that it's being used for something it was never intended for." "Such as?" Harrison prompted. "I don't know, but Mrs. Havisham wrote that they're not done yet. More will disappear. Who's left? Who else knows about the Shepherd's Fold?" Harrison's face went pale. "Oh God, Mrs. Spence. She inherited her husband's knowledge. If they're eliminating witnesses." They found Mrs. Spence in her office, going through accounts with the determinedly normal focus of someone trying not to think about the chaos surrounding them. She looked up in surprise as the 3 burst in. "Mrs. Spence," Harrison said urgently, dropping all pretense, "you're in danger. Your husband worked intelligence during the war. You know things about operations here. That makes you a target." Her face drained of colour. "I don't. I've never spoken about Harold's work. It was classified. I've kept his confidence for 20 years. "It doesn't matter," Tuppence said gently. "Someone believes you know too much, or that you might have access to records or documents that could expose them. But I don't. Harold destroyed everything before he died. Said it was too dangerous to keep. There's nothing left. Are you certain?" Tommy pressed. "No papers, no photographs, no codes or lists?" "Nothing. I swear it." Mrs. Spence was on the verge of tears. "Wait, there was one thing, a key." Harold made me promise to keep it safe, but he never told me what it opened. Just that if anyone ever came asking about the fold, I should give them the key and tell them to look in the old smuggler's cave." "The what?" Harrison demanded. "There's a cave system beneath the cliffs, accessible at low tide. During the smuggling days, the real smuggling days 200 years ago, it was used to hide contraband. Harold said the intelligence services used it during the war for something. He never specified what. Where's the key?" Tuppence asked. Mrs. Spence retrieved it from a locked drawer. An old iron key, heavy and corroded. I don't even know if whatever it opens still exists. It's been 20 years. "We need to check that cave," Harrison said, "before whoever's eliminating witnesses realizes it exists." "Low tide is at 3 o'clock, Mrs. Spence said, consulting a chart on her wall. "That gives us about 5 hours." They were planning their expedition when Veronica appeared, bag in hand, face set with determination. "I'm leaving, now. I don't care about Roger or his secrets or any of this. I'm going to the station and taking the next train anywhere." "Miss Vale," Harrison said, "I strongly advise, I don't care what you advise. People are disappearing and I won't be next." She pushed past them toward the front door. Tommy caught her arm. "Let us at least escort you to the station. It's not safe to go alone." For a moment she wavered. Then she nodded jerkily. "All right, but quickly, before I lose my nerve entirely." As they walked down the cliff path toward the village, Veronica talked compulsively, filling the nervous silence. "Roger used to tell me I worried too much, said I had an overdeveloped imagination. But I was right, wasn't I? Something terrible is happening here." "Yes," Tuppence said honestly. "Something terrible, but we're going to stop it." They were halfway to the village when Tommy noticed it. A figure in the distance, watching from the cliff top, the same place Gilmore had reported seeing someone the night before. "There," he said quietly to Harrison. "Do you see?" Harrison's hand moved to his jacket, where Tuppence assumed he carried a weapon. "Stay close. Keep walking normally." But the figure didn't approach. It simply watched, motionless, as they escorted Veronica to the small station and saw her onto the London train. As the train pulled away, Veronica's frightened face visible in the window, the figure on the cliff remained, a silent sentinel. "They're watching us," Tuppence said as they walked back. "Measuring our next move, or planning theirs," Tommy replied grimly. They returned to find Marchmont waiting in the hotel's sitting room, his expression unreadable. Harrison tensed, hand near his weapon again. "Easy, Inspector," Marchmont said calmly. "I know who you are. Have since the second week. You're not as good at playing country constable as you think." "And you," Harrison replied coldly, "are technically under suspicion. Former intelligence officers are being eliminated. You're connected to the Shepherd's fold. That makes you either a target or a suspect." "Or," Marchmont said, "someone trying to accomplish the same thing you are. Find the person behind this before more people die." He pulled out a telegram. "This arrived an hour ago. From London. My superiors have received a threat. If the investigation continues, there will be casualties. Civilian casualties, they specified." "A bluff," Harrison said, but he sounded uncertain. "Perhaps, but can you risk it?" Marchmont turned to Tommy and Tuppence. "You should leave. This isn't your fight. It's ours. Those of us who lived through the war, who made the choices that led to this. You're civilians, innocents." "We stopped being innocent the moment Mrs. Havisham wrote to us," Tuppence replied. "And we don't abandon cases halfway through, not when people's lives are at stake." Marchmont studied her, then nodded slowly. "You're remarkably like she was, you know. Mrs. Havisham, stubborn, brave. It's what got her killed." You think she's dead then? Tommy asked. I think she discovered something that made her too dangerous to leave alive. Whether her body's at the bottom of the cliff or hidden elsewhere, the result is the same. He paused. There's something else you should know. Gilmore, the man you knew as Gilmore, was actually Hans Richter, German intelligence during the war. He was one of ours, yours. Harrison's voice was sharp. You mean a double agent? Turned in 1917, worked for us for the last year of the war. After the armistice, he disappeared. When he showed up here 6 weeks ago, I knew something was wrong. He was supposed to be dead. Killed in Munich in 1923. His reappearance could only mean one thing. The Shepherd was calling in old agents. To what purpose? Tuppence demanded. I don't know. But Richter was frightened. Genuinely frightened. Whatever he'd been called here to do, he was having second thoughts. That's why he stayed, I think. He was trying to figure a way out. And now he's gone, Tommy said. The fourth disappearance. Or did you... I didn't touch him, Marchmont said flatly. I wanted to question him, not eliminate him. Someone got to him first. Between midnight and dawn, he vanished from a locked room on the 3rd floor. No sign of struggle, no blood, nothing. Just gone. The four of them, Tommy, Tuppence, Harrison and Marchmont, sat in silence, each processing the implications. A wartime spy network reactivated for unknown purposes. Former agents systematically disappeared. And somewhere, someone powerful enough to threaten civilian casualties, orchestrating it all. The cave, Tuppence said suddenly. Mrs. Spence mentioned a cave where documents might be hidden. If we can find evidence of what the original Shepherd's Fold was, we might understand what it's become. Low tide at 3, Harrison confirmed. We'll need torches, rope, and... The lights went out. Complete darkness engulfed the room. For a moment, no one moved. Then Tommy heard it, soft footsteps in the corridor outside. More than one person moving with practiced stealth. Get down! Marchmont hissed. A window shattered. Something heavy thudded into the room. A canister spinning, hissing. Gas! Harrison shouted. Out now! They stumbled toward the door, eyes streaming, throats burning. The hallway was full of smoke or fog. Impossible to tell which. Figures moved in the murk. Indistinct, menacing. Tommy grabbed Tuppence's hand, pulling her toward where he thought the front door should be. Behind them, he heard Harrison shouting, Marchmont cursing, the sound of a struggle. Then fresh air, blessed and cold, and they were outside, gasping, coughing. Tommy, Tuppence managed, her voice ragged. Harrison and Marchmont. I'm here. Harrison emerged from the fog, supporting a dazed-looking Marchmont. Tear gas, I think. Not lethal, but effective. They staggered away from the building, toward the cliff edge, the sea wind clearing their lungs. That was a warning, Marchmont said hoarsely, or an attempt to separate us. Either way, they're not waiting anymore. They're moving against us directly. Then we move faster, Tuppence said, her jaw set despite her streaming eyes. We go to that cave now. Forget waiting for low tide. If there's evidence there, we need it before they destroy it. Or us. As they stood on the cliff edge, the Smuggler's Rest behind them shrouded in artificial fog, the afternoon sun breaking through clouds to cast long shadows. Tommy felt the familiar mix of fear and exhilaration that came with their investigations. They'd been warned, threatened, gassed, which meant they were close to something worth protecting. In Tommy's experience, people who resorted to violence were people who'd run out of clever options. The endgame was beginning. The path down to the caves was treacherous, a narrow track cut into the cliff face by centuries of use. Tommy led the way with Harrison close behind, while Tuppence and Marchmont brought up the rear. The tide was still too high for comfort. Waves crashing against the rocks below, spray misting their faces. This is insane, Marchmont muttered, his earlier composure cracked by the tear gas attack. We should wait for reinforcements from London. By which time, Harrison replied, not breaking stride, the cave could be cleared of evidence or sealed permanently. This is our window. The cave mouth yawned before them, a dark slash in the cliff face just above the waterline. Inside, the sound of waves echoed with cathedral resonance, water sloshing across uneven stone. "Watch your step," Tommy warned, clicking on his electric torch. The floor's slippery. The cave extended back into darkness, with several branching passages. Harrison consulted a rough map Mrs. Spence had sketched from memory. She said the main chamber is about 50 yards in, through the left branch. They proceeded carefully, torchlight dancing across walls gleaming with moisture. Evidence of the cave's past uses were everywhere. Iron rings set in stone for tethering boats, ancient graffiti in French and English, empty casks that had once held smuggled brandy. The left passage narrowed, forcing them to move single file. Tuppence, bringing up the rear, felt the weight of stone pressing down, the claustrophobic certainty that they were being buried alive. She pushed the thought away and focused on Marchmont's back. The passage opened into a larger chamber, perhaps 20 feet across. Unlike the rest of the cave, this showed signs of more recent occupation. A cot, rusted but recognizable. A table made of ship's timber. Metal storage boxes stacked against one wall. "This is it," Harrison said, his voice echoing strangely. "The wartime station." Tommy examined the boxes. They were padlocked, corroded by salt air, but still intact. He produced a set of tools from his jacket, acquired during their previous investigations, and set to work. The first box yielded rotted fabric, unidentifiable equipment, and a stack of waterlogged papers. The second was more promising. Sealed glass jars containing photographs and documents, protected from the elements. Tuppence carefully extracted a jar and opened it. Inside were personnel files, the old wartime format, with photographs clipped to typed reports. She spread them on the table and they gathered around, torchlight illuminating faces from the past. "My God," Marchmont breathed. "The entire network. Names, faces, operational history. This is the complete roster of the Shepherd's Fold." Tommy counted quickly. 37 agents. Some British, some French, some German double agents. All run by someone with the codename Shepherd. He looked up. But which one was the Shepherd? There's no indication here. Harrison was examining another document. This is interesting. A list of safe houses and operational bases. The Smuggler's Rest is on here as expected, but so are 3 other locations. A London address, a country house in Sussex, and a manor in Scotland. "I know that manor," Marchmont said slowly. "It belongs to Lord Petersham. He was in military intelligence during the war, rose very high in the service after the armistice." "High enough to protect a network?" Tuppence asked. "High enough to do anything he wanted," Marchmont confirmed grimly. They continued searching. More documents, more photographs, more pieces of a puzzle that had remained hidden for decades. And then, at the bottom of the third box, sealed in wax, a leather-bound journal. Tommy cracked the wax carefully and opened it. The handwriting was elegant. The entries dated from 1916 to 1918. It was an operational log, detailing every mission, every agent, every success and failure of the Shepherd's Fold. "This is gold," Harrison said. "Evidence of everything. We can build a complete picture of the network from this." "Look at the final entry," Tuppence said, pointing. Tommy read aloud. "March 15th, 1918. The war is turning. The fold must be preserved for the future. Not all wars end with treaties. Some simply change form. What we've built here, this network, these relationships, these methods, will be needed again. I've made arrangements. The fold will sleep, but it will not die. And when it wakes, it will serve a new purpose. A better purpose. Not for nations, but for those who truly understand what the world needs. Silence filled the cave, broken only by dripping water and distant waves. Not for nations, Harrison repeated. For those who understand, this isn't about patriotism or duty. This is about power. Someone's personal power. But whose? Tommy demanded. The journal is signed only with the shepherd symbol, a staff with a crook. No name, no signature. Marchmont was pale. I think I know. Lord Petersham uses that symbol as his personal seal. I've seen it on documents he's signed. He looked at the others. If Petersham is the shepherd, and if he's been protecting this network for 20 years, waiting to reactivate it, then he's been planning something for a very long time. Tuppence finished. Something worth killing to protect. A sound echoed from the passage behind them. Footsteps. Multiple people moving quickly. Someone followed us, Harrison said, reaching for his weapon. Or, Marchmont said, they knew we'd come here eventually. This could be a trap. Either way, we need to leave, Tommy said, gathering the most important documents. Now. They moved back toward the passage, but the footsteps were closer now, accompanied by voices speaking in low, urgent tones. Harrison doused his torch, signaling the others to do the same. In the sudden darkness, they crouched behind the metal boxes, barely breathing. 3 figures entered the chamber, their own torches cutting through the black. 2 were dressed in nondescript clothing, faces obscured by scarves. The 3rd was instantly recognizable despite the dim light. Mrs. Spence, Tuppence whispered, shock coloring her voice. The proprietress of the Smuggler's Rest stood in the center of the chamber, surveying it with an expression of deep satisfaction. Excellent work, she said to her companions. They've done our job for us, found the evidence we've been searching for. Now we simply need to collect it and dispose of the investigators. You, Marchmont said, stepping into the light with his weapon drawn. You're part of this? Mrs. Spence turned, unsurprised. Oh, Captain Marchmont, I wondered when you'd make your move. And Inspector Harrison, your cover was transparent from the start. As for the Beresfords, they've been remarkably persistent. Admirable, really. Your husband, Tommy said, emerging as well. He was the shepherd? Don't be absurd. Harold was a competent operative, nothing more. No, the shepherd is someone far more influential. Someone you've all heard of but never suspected. She smiled, cold and humorless. And before you consider shooting me, Captain, you should know that this cave has another entrance. My associates are currently sealing it with explosives. Timed charges, set to detonate in, she consulted her watch, approximately 3 minutes. Enough time for us to leave. Not nearly enough for you. You're bluffing, Harrison said, but his voice lacked conviction. Am I? Listen carefully. You can already hear them working. In the sudden silence, Tommy heard it. Distant sounds of activity. The scrape of metal on stone. Voices calling instructions. Why? Tuppence demanded. Why reactivate the network? Why kill people who served their country? Because they knew too much about the past, Mrs. Spence replied. And the past must stay buried for the future to unfold as planned. The shepherd's vision is greater than anything you can imagine. A new order built on the foundations of the old. And you, she gestured at them dismissively, are merely obstacles to be removed. She turned to leave, her companions following. At the passage entrance she paused. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. You seem like decent people. But decency doesn't win wars. And make no mistake, this is a war. One you've already lost. Then they were gone, and Tommy heard the splash of water as they escaped toward the beach. "The documents," Harrison said urgently. "We need to." A muffled explosion echoed through the cave. Dust and small stones rained down. Another explosion closer. The cave shook. "They're bringing down the passages," Marchmont said, his face grim. "We have minutes at most before we're sealed in or buried alive." There, Tuppence pointed to a narrow opening in the far wall, barely visible in their wavering torchlight. Natural formation. It might lead somewhere, or nowhere, Tommy said. But he was already moving toward it, the precious journal and documents clutched under one arm. Either way, it's our only chance. They squeezed through the opening as another explosion rocked the main chamber. Behind them, they heard the groan and crash of falling stone. The passage was tight, barely wide enough for a person, angling upward at a steep incline. Tommy led the way, pushing and pulling himself up the rough stone. Behind him, he heard Tuppence's laboured breathing, Harrison's muttered curses, Marchmont's cough, remnants of the earlier tear gas attack. The passage seemed endless. Tommy's shoulders scraped rock on both sides, his hands finding purchase on barely visible ledges. His torch flickered, battery dying, and he cursed the timing. Then, impossibly, a breath of fresh air, cooler, cleaner, carrying the scent of grass and wildflowers rather than salt and stone. "There's an opening," he called back. "Keep moving." The passage widened, becoming a natural chimney angling toward the surface. Tommy pulled himself up the last few feet and emerged into daylight. Glorious, blessed daylight, in a copse of trees about 100 yards from the cliff edge. He helped pull Tuppence up, then Harrison, then Marchmont. They collapsed on the grass, gasping, filthy but alive. "Well," Tuppence said after a moment, her voice shaky but determined. "That was thoroughly unpleasant." "Quite," Tommy agreed. He checked his precious bundle. The documents were intact, including the journal. "But we have what we came for, evidence." "Evidence that Mrs. Spence is a murderer," Harrison said grimly, "and that Lord Petersham may be the shepherd." "We need to get to London," Marchmont said, standing despite obvious exhaustion. "To my superiors. This goes to the highest levels. We'll need protection and authorization to move against Petersham." "Assuming," Tuppence said quietly, "that your superiors aren't already compromised. Mrs. Spence said the shepherd has influence. What if that includes your department, Captain?" The thought hung in the air, dark and troubling. "Then we trust no one," Tommy said finally. "We take this evidence and we expose everything publicly if necessary. But first, we need to get off this cliff alive. Mrs. Spence knows we survived. She'll be coming for us." As if summoned by his words, figures appeared on the path below. Mrs. Spence and her associates, moving quickly toward the hotel. "They'll search for us," Harrison said. "We can't go back to the Smuggler's Rest. They control it now." "The village," Tuppence suggested. "The Admiral's Arms. We can barricade ourselves there and wait for help." "Or," Marchmont said, his eyes on the distant figures, "we end this now. 4 of us, armed against 3 of them. We have surprise on our side." "And they have," Tommy said dryly, "explosives, a willingness to commit murder, and presumably more support nearby. No, we need to be smart about this. We gather our strength, review the evidence, and plan our next move carefully." They made their way carefully through the trees, paralleling the cliff edge, staying out of sight. The village lay ahead, its buildings solid and reassuring after the terror of the cave. But as they approached, Tommy saw something that made his blood run cold. Smoke rising from the direction of the Admiral's arms. And in the village square, a crowd gathering, voices raised in alarm. The shepherd's forces weren't just hunting them, they were destroying any potential sanctuary, any place they might find help. The endgame, it seemed, was not quite what Tommy had imagined. It was far more ruthless, far more immediate, and far more dangerous than anything they'd faced before. The Admiral's arms was indeed ablaze, flames licking from upstairs windows, while the village's volunteer brigade fought desperately with bucket chains and an ancient hand pump. The landlord, a burly man named Hoskins, stood in the square directing efforts, his face blackened with soot. Tommy approached carefully. "What happened?" "Started in the back room," Hoskins said grimly. "Right where the paraffin's stored. Too convenient to be accidental, if you ask me. Someone wanted this place to burn. Did you see anyone suspicious?" Harrison asked. Hoskins squinted at them, taking in their dishevelled, dirt-covered appearance. Several strangers in the village today. Don't usually see that this time of year. One woman, older, well-dressed. 2 men with her. They went into the pub just before the fire started, then left quick-like. His eyes narrowed. "You're from the Smuggler's Rest, aren't you? Heard there's been trouble up there." "Rather more than trouble," Tuppence admitted. "We need somewhere safe to stay. Somewhere we can make a telephone call to London." "Post office is closed for the day," Hoskins said, "and Mrs. Grayson, the postmistress, isn't one to open on her schedule off. Protective of her privacy, she is." He studied them shrewdly. "What's this really about? The disappearances?" "Yes," Tommy said, making a decision. "We're investigating them, and we've discovered something that makes us targets. If you can help us, just a safe place for a few hours, we can end this." Hoskins considered, then jerked his head toward a stone building across the square. "Village Hall. Has a telephone for council business. I have the key." He produced it from his pocket. "But I'll want the full story when this is over. For 20 years, Salcombe St. Mary has been quiet. Now we've got fires and disappearances and God knows what else. Someone needs to answer for it." The village hall was a sturdy structure, built to withstand coastal storms. Once inside with the door locked and barricaded, they finally had a moment to breathe and plan. Tommy spread the documents from the cave on a long table. In the better light, they could examine them properly. The journal was the key. Page after page of operational details. Codes, agent names, mission summaries. "Look at this," Tuppence said, pointing to an entry from 1917. The shepherd authorized payments to agents from a private account. Not military funds, personal money. Whoever ran the fold had significant private wealth. "Petersham fits that description," Marchmont said. "Inherited a fortune from coal mining. Could easily have funded operations without official channels." Harrison was examining the personnel files. "Here's something interesting. Several of these agents were recruited from unusual backgrounds. Not military or diplomatic corps, but academics, artists, businessmen. People with skills and access, but no official standing. Building a private intelligence network," Tommy said slowly, "not answerable to military command or government oversight. Petersham was creating his own service, but for what purpose?" Tuppence asked. "The journal says a better purpose. What did he envision?" The answer came from an unexpected source. A loose page tucked into the back of the journal, written in the same hand, but dated much later. October 1924. "The war taught me that nations are an impediment to progress. Tommy read aloud. Leaders change, policies shift, alliances crumble. But a dedicated group, united by vision rather than geography, that is eternal. The Fold will be my instrument for reshaping the post-war world. Not through politics or diplomacy, but through information. Control information, and you control everything. The first phase, preservation and dormancy, is complete. The second phase begins when the time is right. When another war comes, and it will come, the Fold will be ready, not to serve Britain or France or any nation, but to serve a higher purpose, creating order from chaos, a new world order built on intelligence and efficiency rather than the failed systems of the past. Silence filled the hall. He's not a patriot, Harrison said finally. He's a traitor, planning to use his network for personal gain, for some ideological vision of a new world order. And, Marchmont added heavily, he's been in a position to implement that vision. Petersham has been at the centre of British intelligence for 20 years. He's had access to everything, operations, agents, secrets. If he's been building towards something, using the resources of the state for his own purposes, then the current disappearances are him cleaning house, Tuppence finished, eliminating anyone who knew about the original Fold before he activates it for whatever he's planning next. We need to call London, Harrison said, reaching for the telephone, but the line was dead, cut, presumably, during the recent troubles. No matter, Tommy said. We have the evidence. We'll take it directly to Whitehall tomorrow. But tonight, we stay here, stay safe, and make sure these documents survive. And pray that Mrs. Spence doesn't find us first, Tuppence added. But Mrs. Spence, it seemed, had other plans. The attack came at sunset. Not a frontal assault, but something more insidious. Smoke, filtering through the ventilation slats of the old building. Not tear gas this time, but actual smoke, thick and choking. They're trying to flush us out, Marchmont said, coughing, or suffocate us inside. The windows, Tommy said, but they were barred. A safety feature from when the hall had briefly served as a holding cell for miscreants. Back door, Harrison suggested, but when he tried it, it was blocked from outside. Trapped. Though I can't help wondering. Wondering what? How many other Folds are out there? How many other Lord Petershams building their private kingdoms in shadow? She leaned against him. Sometimes I think we're just scratching the surface, Tommy. That under the veneer of civilization, there's a whole world of secrets and schemes. Probably. But tonight we stopped one of them. Saved lives. Exposed the truth. That counts for something. It does, she agreed. She turned to look back at the Smuggler's Rest, now crawling with police. Do you think we'll ever know what happened to the missing people? Mrs. Havisham and the others? Commissioner Sanderson says they're searching the grounds and cliffs thoroughly. If there are bodies to be found, they'll find them. As for the living, he shrugged. Sometimes people stay disappeared. Perhaps that's safer. They stood in comfortable silence. Two people who'd faced danger together so many times, it had become almost routine. Almost. Home tomorrow? Tuppence asked. Home tomorrow, Tommy confirmed. Though I suspect we'll be needed in London for depositions and trials, naturally. But after that, home. Albert Terrace, our own bed, no more smugglers' caves or poisoned gas or megalomaniacal spy masters. Until the next time, Tommy said dryly. Until the next time, Tuppence agreed, not without satisfaction. Behind them, the Smuggler's Rest stood against the night sky, its secrets finally exposed, its dark purpose ended. Whatever ghosts haunted those ancient walls could rest now, their stories told, their warnings heeded. Justice, imperfect but real, had been served. The trials took place in London over the course of 3 months, from January to March of the following year. Tommy and Tuppence attended as witnesses, watching as the full scope of Lord Petersham's conspiracy unfolded in open court. The prosecution was methodical, building their case document by document. The journal from the cave became Exhibit A, damning evidence of 20 years of planning and preparation. Personnel files revealed the extent of the Shepherd's Fold, with agents in France, Germany, Italy, and even Russia. Financial records showed how Petersham had funneled millions into his private network, using his legitimate business interests as cover. Mrs. Spence broke first, offering testimony in exchange for leniency. Her account of the past 20 years painted a picture of gradual corruption, how her husband had believed he was serving his country, only to realize too late that he was serving one man's ambition. After his death, Petersham had approached her, offering money and security in exchange for maintaining the Smuggler's Rest as an operational base. "I didn't know about the murders at first," she testified, her voice barely audible. "I thought we were just maintaining a safe house. But when Mr. Cartwright disappeared, I realized what was happening. I was in too deep by then. Petersham said if I tried to leave, I'd be the next one to vanish." "Why didn't you go to the authorities?" the prosecutor asked. "Because Petersham showed me a list." Mrs. Spence's hands shook. Names of people in the government, in police, in intelligence services, all of them compromised, all of them on his payroll or under his control. He said if I betrayed him, no one would believe me, that I'd simply disappear like the others, and the fold would continue. The list she provided sent shockwaves through Whitehall. 2 members of Parliament, a senior police official, 3 intelligence officers, and a Crown prosecutor, all revealed to have been working for Petersham's network. Secondary trials would follow, but the immediate effect was seismic. Captain Marchmont testified about his investigation, explaining how he'd been working undercover for Special Branch for months before the Beresfords arrived. "I knew something was wrong at the Smuggler's Rest, but I couldn't prove it. Every time I got close, evidence would vanish. Witnesses would refuse to talk. It was only when Mrs. Havisham began her own investigation that things started breaking open." "What happened to Mrs. Havisham?" the defense attorney asked during cross-examination. Marchmont's face was grim. "We found her body during the investigation, buried in the grounds of the hotel, along with Mr. Cartwright and Miss Pierce. They were murdered when they discovered too much about the Fold's current operations. And Mr. Richter, the man known as Gilmore, he survived, fled to France when he realized what was happening. We have his testimony as well." The most dramatic moment came when Lord Petersham himself took the stand. Against his lawyer's advice, he insisted on defending his actions. "Everything I did," he said, his voice carrying through the courtroom, "was in service of preventing another catastrophic war. The Great War killed 10 million people because of incompetence and ignorance. With the Fold, I could have prevented that. With the Fold, I can prevent the next one. By murdering British citizens?" the prosecutor challenged. "By making difficult decisions that soft-minded bureaucrats are incapable of making." Mrs. Havisham, Cartwright and Pierce were casualties of a greater conflict. Their deaths, while regrettable, served a purpose. What purpose? Protecting the operational security of a network that will save millions of lives when the next war comes. And it will come, gentlemen. Germany is rearming even as we speak. Old alliances are crumbling. Within a decade, Europe will be at war again. When that happens, you'll wish you had let me continue my work. So you admit to the murders. I admit to doing what was necessary for the greater good. The confession sealed his fate. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all counts. Lord Petersham was sentenced to death, though the sentence was later commuted to life imprisonment given his age and former service. Mrs. Spence received 15 years for conspiracy and accessory to murder. Her testimony against Petersham and the network members had earned her some consideration, but not forgiveness. The 2 men who'd served as Mrs. Spence's enforcers, ex-soldiers hired by Petersham, received lighter sentences in exchange for testimony. They'd believed they were working for a legitimate intelligence operation, they claimed. Whether the jury believed them was immaterial. Their cooperation was more valuable than their punishment. On the day the verdicts were announced, Tommy and Tuppence stood on the steps of the Old Bailey, surrounded by reporters and curious onlookers. Commissioner Sanderson joined them, looking exhausted but satisfied. "Well done," he said quietly. "Your persistence broke this open. Without you, Petersham would still be operating freely." "What happens to the fold now?" Tuppence asked. "The network he built. We're systematically dismantling it. Dozens of arrests across Europe. Assets frozen, safe houses closed, operations shut down. It will take years to be certain we've found everything, but the core is broken." And the people he had compromised? The officials on his payroll? Sanderson's expression darkened. "Some have resigned. Some will face trial. Some... Well, let's say that British intelligence has a long memory. They won't hold positions of power again." "That's not the same as justice," Tommy observed. "No, but it's pragmatic. Exposing everyone Petersham compromised would paralyze the government. Sometimes discretion serves the greater good." He must have seen the irony of echoing Petersham's own justification, because he added quickly, "Though not at the cost of innocent lives. There's a line and we'll hold it." As they walked away from the courthouse, Tuppence said, "Do you believe him? That they'll truly dismantle everything?" "I believe they'll try," Tommy replied. "But Petersham was right about one thing. Another war is coming. The conditions are already forming. When it does, there will be people who remember the Fold's methods and think they can be used for good." "A shadow war," Tuppence mused. "Intelligence networks operating outside official channels, answerable to no one. It's terrifying, yes, but also inevitable, I suspect. The next war won't be like the last one. It will be fought with information as much as with soldiers. The question is whether the people who fight it remember the difference between means and ends." They walked in silence through London's streets, past buildings still showing scars from the wartime Zeppelin raids, past memorials to the fallen, past people going about their daily lives unaware of the conspiracy that had just been prevented. "I keep thinking about Mrs. Havisham," Tuppence said. "She wrote to us strangers because she remembered us solving one case years ago. She trusted us with her life, and we failed her," Tommy said quietly. "We arrived too late, but we avenged her. We exposed the truth. We stopped Petersham." She squeezed his arm. "It's not perfect justice, but it's something." "It's something," Tommy agreed. That evening, they received an unexpected visitor at their hotel. Hans Richter, the man they'd known as Gilmore, looking haggard but alive. He'd returned to London specifically to thank them. "I owe you my life," he said in his careful English, the German accent now undisguised. "When I realized what Petersham was doing, eliminating anyone who knew about the old fold, I knew I would be next. But I couldn't leave without trying to stop him. I thought perhaps I could be clever, gather evidence." He laughed bitterly. "Instead, I nearly got myself killed." "Not quite," Tuppence said. She'd been examining the structure while the men talked. There's a cellar access, old smuggler's tunnel, unless I miss my guess. This whole coast is riddled with them. They found the entrance behind a stack of chairs, a trapdoor leading down into darkness. The tunnel beyond was narrow but passable, angling away from the village toward the cliffs. Ironic, Tommy said as they descended, documents wrapped in his jacket for protection. Escaping through smugglers' tunnels, the shepherd would appreciate the poetry. The tunnel ran for perhaps 200 yards before opening onto a rocky beach, different from the one where the cave had been. Above them, the Smuggler's Rest was visible on its clifftop perch, lights blazing in the gathering dusk. "Endgame," Harrison said grimly. "We go back there, confront them, and finish this." 4 of us against an unknown number of them, Marchmont objected. "That's suicide." "No," Tuppence said firmly. "It's justice. They've killed Mrs. Havisham and 3 others. They've tried to kill us multiple times. They're acting on orders from someone powerful, someone who thinks themselves above the law. But they're not. No one is. Tuppence is right," Tommy said. "We have the evidence. We know the truth. Now we need to force the shepherd or his agent into the open. Make them confess on record in front of witnesses." "How?" Harrison asked. Tommy smiled, the expression not entirely pleasant. "By giving them what they want, or appearing to. We'll offer a trade, the documents for safe passage. Mrs. Spence will agree, thinking she can simply kill us after the exchange. But we'll have Hoskins and the village men hidden nearby, listening, witnesses that even Petersham can't silence." "It's dangerous," Marchmont warned. "Everything we've done has been dangerous," Tuppence replied. "This is just the last dance." They sent Hoskins back to the village to gather volunteers, steady men who'd lived in Salcombe St. Mary all their lives, and resented the violence that had come to their shores. While he was gone, the 4 investigators planned meticulously. At precisely 8 o'clock, Tommy approached the Smuggler's Rest alone, carrying a white flag improvised from a handkerchief. Mrs. Spence met him at the door, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Beresford, I confess I'm surprised. I expected you to flee to London." "We have something you want," Tommy said. "The documents from the cave. The journal, all of it. We're willing to trade," her eyes narrowed. "In exchange for safe passage for all 4 of us. Let us leave Salcombe St. Mary, and we'll give you the evidence. You can destroy it, and no one need ever know about the shepherd's fold." "And I'm supposed to trust you? Do you have a choice? You didn't get the documents from the cave. You don't know where we hid them. You can spend days searching or trying to capture us, or you can make a simple trade and end this tonight." Mrs. Spence studied him, calculating. "Where are the others?" "Safe. They'll bring the documents once I signal that we have an agreement." "Very well. Bring them here to the sitting room. We'll make the exchange and you can all leave." "You have my word." Tommy knew exactly what that word was worth, but he nodded gravely. 1 hour. We'll need time to retrieve the documents and prepare to leave." He returned to the others hidden in the cliffside brush. She agreed. As expected, she's planning treachery. "As are we," Tuppence said with satisfaction. "Sauce for the goose." They returned to the hotel precisely at 9 o'clock. Tommy and Tuppence in front, Harrison and Marchmont flanking, all 4 walking with the deliberate calm of people who'd accepted their fate. Hoskins and 8 villagers were positioned around the building, listening through open windows, ready to intervene if necessary. The sitting room had been prepared like a stage set. Chairs arranged, lamps lit, the fire burning brightly. Mrs. Spence sat in the place of honour, her 2 associates standing behind her. But there was a 4th person in the room seated in shadow, face obscured. "Lord Petersham, I presume?" Tommy said calmly. The figure leaned forward into the light, revealing a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and cold, intelligent eyes. Mr. Beresford, Mrs. Beresford, Inspector Harrison, Captain Marchmont. His voice was cultured, carrying the weight of authority. You've been remarkably persistent. I'm almost impressed. Almost, Tuppence said. How disappointing. We've worked quite hard at being impressive. Despite everything, Petersham smiled. Yes, I can see why Mrs. Havisham thought you'd be useful. You have the gift of not knowing when to quit. Unfortunately for you, that's a fatal flaw. We have the documents, Tommy said, placing his bundle on the table. The journal, the personnel files, everything from the cave. You can verify their authenticity, then we leave. That was the agreement. Petersham gestured to Mrs. Spence, who examined the documents carefully. After a moment, she nodded. It's all here. Everything we've been searching for. Excellent, Petersham said. Then we can dispense with the pretense. You're not leaving this room alive, you understand. You know too much, and you've proven too clever by half. But before you die, I'd like you to understand why. Villain's monologue? Tuppence said brightly. How delightfully traditional. Mock if you wish, Mrs. Beresford, but history will judge me a visionary. Petersham stood pacing before the fire. I've spent 20 years building something remarkable. A private intelligence network accountable to no one, funded through careful investments, staffed by the best operatives from the war. Do you know what I can do with such a tool? Play God? Tommy suggested. Reshape the world according to your personal preferences? Accumulate power without oversight? Prevent another war, Petersham said sharply. The Great War killed millions because of incompetence and ego. Leaders making decisions based on pride rather than information. With the Fold, I can ensure that never happens again. I can control information flows, manipulate events, guide policy. Not for personal gain, but for stability. For peace. By killing anyone who stands in your way? Harrison challenged. By eliminating your former agents? Unfortunate but necessary casualties. They knew about the old Fold, which was crude and tied to national interests. The new Fold is global, ideological, pure. I couldn't risk them exposing it before the network was ready. Ready for what? Tuppence asked. For the next war, Petersham said calmly. Because there will be a next war, Mrs. Beresford. Germany is already rearming. Old resentments are festering. Within a decade, Europe will be ablaze again. When that happens, the Fold will be positioned to influence outcomes, to minimize casualties, to shape the peace that follows. Not Britain's peace or France's peace, but a lasting peace based on rational principles. And you'll be at the center of it, Marchmont said, the puppet master pulling strings. If that's what it takes. Petersham's face hardened. I've given my life to service. I've watched politicians fumble and bumble while soldiers died. No more. The Fold will ensure that competence, not popularity, guides decisions. That information, not ideology, shapes policy. It's tyranny, Tommy said flatly. Benevolent tyranny, perhaps, in your mind. But tyranny nonetheless. One man deciding what's best for millions. How long until your noble goals become self-serving? How long until the Fold exists to preserve itself, rather than serve any higher purpose? It won't happen. I've built in safeguards, selected successors who share my vision, and like Mrs. Spence, Tuppence interrupted, who murder and burn and terrorize. That's your vision of peace. Petersham's expression flickered. Sometimes the means are regrettable, but the end justifies nothing, Harrison said. The end justifies nothing. You're a murderer, Lord Petersham, a traitor, and you're under arrest. Petersham laughed. By whose authority? You think you can touch me? I have allies in every branch of government, every level of intelligence services. I am untouchable. "Actually," said a new voice from the doorway, "you're not." A man entered, military bearing, sharp eyes, carrying an air of absolute authority. Behind him were uniformed police officers, notebooks ready. "Commissioner Sanderson," Petersham said, his confidence finally cracking. "What are you doing here?" "Listening," Sanderson replied. "Thanks to Mr. Hoskins and his neighbours, who had the presence of mind to alert me when Mr. Beresford sent word earlier. We've heard everything, Lord Petersham. Your confession, your plans, your admission of multiple murders. It's over. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. You're under arrest for murder, conspiracy, treason, and more charges than I care to enumerate at the moment." Sanderson nodded to his officers. "Take him." As they led Petersham away, still protesting, still insisting he was acting for the greater good, Mrs. Spence tried to make a run for it. She didn't get far. Hoskins himself tackled her, grim satisfaction on his face. "That's for burning my pub," he said. In the aftermath, police securing the building, statements being taken, order slowly emerging from chaos. Tommy and Tuppence stood on the cliff edge, watching the moon rise over the sea. "Another case closed," Tommy said. "Why did you come to the Smuggler's Rest?" Tuppence asked. "If you knew it was dangerous?" "Because Petersham summoned me, said there was a new operation, one that would make use of my skills. I thought perhaps it was legitimate. My government was working with British intelligence on various matters, but when I arrived and saw Marchmont, I knew something was wrong. He should have been dead. We all thought he died in Paris in 22. Another disappearance, Tommy said. Another loose end Petersham couldn't tie off. Exactly. So I stayed, pretending to work on my novel, really trying to understand what was happening. When Mrs. Havisham started asking questions, I tried to warn her, but she wouldn't listen. She was convinced she could expose the conspiracy on her own. "Where did you go?" Tuppence asked. "When you disappeared from the hotel, Marchmont got word to me that Petersham's people were coming for me. He helped me escape through a service entrance, gave me money and papers. I fled to Dover, then to France. I've been hiding there, waiting to hear if it was safe to return." He looked at them both. "I came to testify against Petersham, but also to thank you. You finished what Mrs. Havisham started. You brought down the shepherd. We just pulled on the threads she'd identified," Tommy said. "She did the dangerous work. She deserves the credit," Richter nodded sadly. "She was a brave woman, braver than many soldiers I knew during the war. Her memory should be honoured." After he left, promising to stay in touch, Tuppence turned to Tommy. "Do you think it's truly over? The shepherd's fold, I mean. Not just Petersham, but the idea behind it. Private intelligence networks, operating outside the law." "No," Tommy said honestly. "I don't think it's over. Petersham wasn't wrong about everything. There will be another war, and it will be fought differently than the last one. Information will be crucial. The temptation to create networks like the Fold will be enormous. Then all we did was delay the inevitable. We stopped one man from playing God," Tommy corrected gently. "We prevented murders, exposed corruption, and reminded people that there are lines that shouldn't be crossed, even in the name of greater good." "That's not nothing, Tuppence. That's significant," she smiled, weary but genuine. "You always know what to say." One of my many talents, along with dramatic breathing while pretending not to snore. I maintain that I do not snore. Their laughter echoed through the hotel room, a moment of lightness after months of tension and danger. The next day, they returned to Albert Terrace, to their own home and their own lives. The newspapers continued to report on the trials, on the shocking revelations about Lord Petersham's conspiracy. But for Tommy and Tuppence, the case was closed. They'd done what they could. prevented what they could prevent, exposed what needed exposing. The world would continue turning, dangers would continue emerging, and somewhere, someone would probably try to revive the idea of the shepherd's fold under a different name. But that was a problem for another day, another investigation. For now, they were home, they were safe, and they were together. Everything else could wait. 6 months later, on a warm August afternoon, Tommy and Tuppence sat in their garden at Albert Terrace, enjoying tea and the particular satisfaction that comes from having survived something dangerous and emerging intact on the other side. The newspapers had finally stopped running stories about the Petersham conspiracy. New scandals had captured public attention. A political crisis in France, economic troubles in America, rumblings from Germany that confirmed Tommy's prediction about the coming tensions. "Sometimes," Tuppence said, pouring milk into her tea with the precision she brought to all things, "I wonder what would have happened if Mrs. Havisham had written to someone else, or if we'd simply ignored the letter. Then Petersham would still be operating, more people would have disappeared, and the fold would continue growing in shadow." Tommy accepted his cup, though I doubt she wrote to us by chance. She was an intelligence professional, remember. She chose us deliberately. Because of that embassy affair in 19. Tuppence was still trying to remember the woman. I honestly cannot recall meeting her. Perhaps she remembered us more clearly than we remember her. That's often the way with witnesses and investigators. Their reflection was interrupted by the arrival of Betty with the post. Among the usual bills and circulars was a formal-looking envelope, expensive paper, addressed to both of them. Tuppence opened it and laughed. "Well, Commissioner Sanderson is having a reception. To honour those who assisted in matters of national importance. He's inviting us." "How diplomatic," Tommy observed. "No mention of spy rings or conspiracies or near-death experiences in sea caves. Should we go? I suppose we must. It would be rude to decline." He took the invitation, examining it. "Next month. Black tie. Very formal. Very respectable. Very boring, you mean?" "Probably." He grinned at her. "Though I imagine Marchmont will be there. It might be interesting to see what's become of him." The reception proved to be as formal and boring as Tommy had predicted, held at a government building in Whitehall, with too many speeches and not enough substance. But afterward, as the crowd dispersed into smaller conversational groups, they did indeed encounter Captain Marchmont. He looked different, relaxed, no longer carrying the weight of his investigation. With him was a young woman, attractive and intelligent-looking, whom he introduced as his fiancée. "Miss Judith Harrington," he said. "She's with the Foreign Office. Legitimate Foreign Office, I should specify. Not my pretend cover story." "Congratulations," Tuppence said warmly. "When's the happy day?" "October. Small ceremony, family only. We've both had enough of large public events for a while." Marchmont's expression grew more serious. "I wanted to thank you both properly. What we accomplished at Salcombe St. Mary, it mattered. We disrupted a significant threat." "Have they found everything?" Tommy asked. "All of Petersham's network. Most of it. Some threads remain untied, there always are. But the core has been dismantled. The fold is finished as an operational entity." He paused. "Though I'll be honest, the idea behind it hasn't died. There are people in government who look at what Petersham built and see potential rather than danger." "That's troubling," Tuppence said. "It is. But there are also people who remember that 3 innocent people died because one man decided he knew better than the law. That provides some deterrent." He glanced around the crowded room. "The world is changing, Mr. and Mrs. Beresford. Intelligence work is becoming more sophisticated, more necessary. The next war, when it comes, will be different from the last one. Information will be crucial. You're saying networks like the Fold will emerge again, Tommy said. I'm saying they already exist. Legitimate ones under proper oversight, but the temptation to operate outside oversight will always exist. People like Petersham will always believe they know better, that the ends justify the means. He smiled grimly. That's why people like you are important, to remind the rest of us where the lines are. After he'd gone, Tuppence said thoughtfully, He's right, you know, about the changing world, about the next war. I know. Tommy watched the crowd. Diplomats, intelligence officers, politicians, all of them preparing in their various ways for conflicts they could sense coming but couldn't yet prevent. But that's not our concern, Tuppence. We're not spies or diplomats or politicians. We're just people who occasionally stumble into mysteries and do our best to solve them. Stumble is one way to put it, Tuppence said dryly. Though I notice we keep stumbling into rather significant mysteries. Perhaps we have a talent for it. Or a curse. Now you're being dramatic. They left the reception early, citing fatigue, and walked through London's evening streets. The city was alive with lights and voices, people enjoying summer warmth, unaware of the shadows their leaders were fighting. Do you regret it? Tommy asked as they waited for a taxi. Getting involved? We could have simply ignored Mrs. Havisham's letter. And lived with the knowledge that we might have prevented murders. Stopped a conspiracy? No, Tuppence shook her head firmly. I don't regret it. It was dangerous and frightening, and we nearly died several times. But we did good, Tommy. Real, measurable good. That matters. It does, he agreed. The taxi arrived, and they settled into the back seat, heading home through familiar streets. Though I wouldn't mind if our next adventure was slightly less life-threatening. Perhaps a nice quiet art theft. Or a missing inheritance case. How dull that sounds, Tuppence said. But she was smiling. Though I suppose after spy networks and murder conspiracies, anything would seem dull. We could always take up golf. Absolutely not. They laughed together, comfortable and content. The case of the Shepherd's Fold was closed. Justice, imperfect but real, had been served. The world would continue its uncertain path towards the next crisis. But for tonight, they were home, they were safe, and they were together. That was enough. Back at Albert Terrace, as they prepared for bed, Tuppence paused by the window, looking out at the quiet street. Tommy, she said thoughtfully, yes? Do you ever wonder if there's someone out there right now, discovering something terrible, some new conspiracy or crime, and wondering if they should investigate or leave it alone? Frequently, Tommy admitted. But that's not our responsibility, Tuppence. We can't solve every mystery, right? Every wrong. We can only do what we can, when we can, with the resources and knowledge available to us, I suppose. She turned from the window, though if another strange letter arrives from someone claiming to need our help, then we'll probably investigate it, Tommy finished, because that's who we are. That's what we do. For better or worse, he agreed. They settled into their comfortable bed, in their comfortable home, in their comfortable life. But both of them knew that comfort was temporary. Adventure and danger would find them again. Some new mystery would emerge, some new threat would appear, and they would face it together, as they always had. That was the promise they'd made to each other, years ago when they first became partners in detection. To face the darkness together, to seek truth together, to never let the other face danger alone. It was a promise they'd kept through war and peace, through danger and safety, through triumph and near disaster. It was a promise they would keep until the end. Outside, London slept. In Berlin and Paris and Moscow, plans were being laid, alliances formed, preparations made for conflicts yet to come. The shadow of the next war was already falling across Europe, though few recognized it yet. But in a small bedroom in Albert Terrace, Tommy and Tuppence Beresford slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they'd done their part. They'd stopped one conspiracy, saved lives, brought criminals to justice. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tomorrow was another day. For tonight, they had tea, triumph, and each other. What more could anyone ask for?